And welcome to another Break My Game podcast episode where we talk about playtesting, game design, and all the cool, fun things designers think up along the way. Today I'll be joined by Joseph Frederick, a incredible designer who also is a moderator over at the Break My Game Discord. Joseph, I'd love to hear a little bit about you and how you got started in game design and any cool things you'd like to introduce us to in terms of conceptual thinking and all the deep and powerful thoughts you have. And if you can sum that up in 30 seconds, that'd be great. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first, thanks for having me, Matthew. I've been designing, I feel, since I was a kid, since I got into Magic and Warhammer, all those things that really, are just, I don't know, really spoke to me as a kid. So I've wanted to design around those when I was younger. And I'd say more seriously, I've been designing for the past 3 years. And um, I really haven't. I was kind of just lost in the waters for a few years
Mm-hmm.
with that whole process because it can be intimidating. But I think the past year has been really, really important to kind of focusing what I want to, what kind of games I want to make, and how I get those made and or the process.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so Break My Game has actually been really crucial in finding a community that for me that I can, you know, design with and brainstorm with and playtest. Most
Mm-hmm.
importantly,
Nice. That all sounds awesome. And by the way, I love your answer. I thought I did a great job of diving into my incredibly intense intro questions. So fantastic work there. I was just kind of curious, just sort of based on some of the experiences you shared with us just now. What are some of the biggest differences for you that you feel a designer? Because you mentioned this last year has been very prominent for you, and admittedly, that's been sort of a through line that I've seen with a lot of designers, including myself. For you specifically, what are some of the big differences now compared to, say, before this last year?
yeah. So um, I would spend so much time working on a game idea, and trying to make the physical representation of that um, would was just so it would just take so much time. And by the time I got half the components done, something changed, and I'm like, yeah, I got to redo these. And I think I play tested maybe once or twice with just a few of my friends. A game that I had been working on for
Mm-hmm.
almost a year at one point, and it was very discouraging, just because the playtest admittedly did not go that well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I felt like a lot of the projects I would work on would just go through this very in-depth process that just and I come from a graphic designer background, so unfortunately, it's just not in my uh, being to do things in Word and just print them out and just make things, make life easy.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it's just like a 20% design solution, I want something, some
Right.
some color on those cards and something
Mm-hmm.
to help me kind of get a sense of what it will look like thematically or for art. Anyways, that would take ages. It felt like, and this past year, I always knew about Tabletop Simulator, Tabletopia, but I just never really um, felt like getting into it. I didn't know anybody who used it, you know, um, I honestly thought it was a pretty small crowd of people who used it. So I, I didn't think it was worth my time.
Hmm.
And boy, was I wrong. Um, tabletop simulator has been uh, huge, huge in my development process and workflow because just getting things from Illustrator or Photoshop directly over, just uploading it, is so much faster than having to print and cut or send to get copies made somewhere. So
Hmm.
much faster, and it makes the prototyping um, process just immensely more satisfying, I think.
Would you say it's kind of almost become essential, or would you say that there's
Ooh,
still room for to just ignore it completely and seek playtesting in other ways?
that's a good question. Yeah, it almost feels like it for me,
Hmm.
um, just for my own personal development process.
Hmm. Well, it.
And I can't say that for everyone, I'm sure, but yeah.
Hmm. It sounds like you sort of process your design flow in a more in a slightly more visual way, and I know from experience
Mhm.
cutting paper out every day is exhausting, and so I can imagine that this has probably uh, vastly improved the speed in which you're getting conception idea to conception to table and so on and so forth.
Yes, yes.
Um, well, so that sort of brings me to another area of discussion I wanted to focus on with you. As someone who is a little more graphic design oriented, and you sort of have that more how does this look mindset. How do you feel that influences you as both a game designer and as someone who is leading a playtest? So, like, how do
Mm.
you work through that? How do you utilize that frame to make your creations?
Well, sometimes I think it's a curse. It just, you know, even with tabletop simulator, it still can take a bit more time to get something to the table versus if I was just going to throw some words on some cards and call it a day
Mm,
for a first pass of a prototype. Um, and I have slowly tried to get a little bit better about that. Not investing so much time on art that will probably change. But it influences me a lot because I just have to have I have to have a visual of what my grand vision will be. Even if it's not what the grand vision is, I need to need to see that it's headed in that direction. And I also want to make sure that players have a feel for the game other than just text.
hmm.
Um, and that's just me. I know that it's not logistically that's just not possible for a lot of designers, and I totally get that. And
Hmm.
when I play test other games, I definitely take that into account. I'm not judging people off of their text on cards or clip art.
Hmm.
I use clip art a lot actually in my early designs because it's just an easy way to get across what you are envisioning.
Hmm.
So
Well, it's interesting to me because so personally, I've played a few of your games now, and I think that there are sort of like you've sort of dove into here. I think there's pros and cons to anything, but I think there's a
yeah,
lot to take from it. Like I've learned a lot just seeing your games on the table. And what are some things that designers should be aware of when they're utilizing graphic design, and why should they at least think about graphic design when they're preparing a game for a play test or getting it on the table, or even if they're in the early stages? Because I mean, I know you're suggesting it's a curse sometimes, but it sounds like when it's not a curse, there also are some real uses for that as well.
yeah. Well, I mean that's interesting. well, readability of everything is really important, right?
Hmm.
I think this is kind of getting into what you're asking. You know, making sure that everything on a card is legible and makes sense. And that goes not just for text, but for iconography. Um, Making sure that your icons represent exactly what you're trying to, uh, portray.
Hmm.
Um, and making sure it's just not icon crazy too.
Right.
You want to make sure it's really about user experience, user interface, UI, UX, making sure that all the pieces kind of mesh together and tell a cohesive story, to make sure that people understand your game.
Hmm.
Um, that's kind of like the real underlying tones, I guess, that graphic design can help tell.
Mm. So so essentially that's something that every designer should keep in mind when they're doing a play test is like is readability. And and it sounds like the baseline, can this game be interpreted by looking at it? Is there too much going on where it becomes distracting, and sort of finding that point where it's accessible. I think that's the word I'm taking away from what you're saying is the accessibility of the design in terms of how it looks and how it performs on the table. Would that be kind
Yeah,
of ballpark? Okay. Uh, so it's really interesting to me because like I personally am unbelievably messy when making games. I that is a struggle area for me. What are some things that you would recommend to a designer like myself who is trying to, bring a game to the table? They may have some limited skills in terms of like putting
yeah,
things together. What are some maybe like tips and tricks that could like help a designer get that game onto that table and make it look readable and
yeah,
accessible in that sense?
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think reference reference is huge. If I reference games or designers or artists that I really appreciate and admire, and I'm like, man, I want my games to look like that. But to take that and then kind of break it down based off of your own knowledge of things and say, like, how do they get their cards to look like that and why? Think about the process behind it, the reasons for the hierarchy of that card and why all of that flows.
Hmm.
The other thing, yeah, like the other thing is, I I know a lot of people use. Oh man, I'm drawing a blank. What is the program that it's not Photoshop, but it's like the free version of
Oh,
Photoshop.
GIMP.
Yes, GIMP. Admittedly, it's been years since I've used GIMP, but I definitely think there are some better options out there. Even if you don't want to go with um, Adobe, which is I'll admit a bit overpriced. Having to do a monthly um,
I might edit out.
subscription
I
is.
might edit out a bit. I think it's just overpriced.
Yes, okay, that's fine. There are there are some better options out there, especially if you're on a budget. Um, there is a company out there that does. Um, I'm not sure if their company is called Affinity or just the software that they run is called Affinity, but the they uh, th- they have a suite of programs called Affinity that is very very similar to Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign. They do all the same stuff fairly well, and uh, you can do it. You can get I think all of them for 100 bucks or under $100, and it's a one time fee, one time purchase,
Hmm.
which is great. So if you have the money to put towards something like that, I think it's definitely an investment worth uh, going for, especially you're on the if you're trying to go the self publishing way.
The what
Uh,
way?
self publishing.
Oh, self publishing. Got it.
Yeah, because that's also I also feel that if you're trying to self-publish, I would care a little bit more about the graphic design of something.
Hmm.
Uh, but you know, I guess that's not something you would need to be as invested in, or as you know, uh, if you were trying to just get your game picked up
Hmm.
from another publisher.
Right.
Yeah,
So it's interesting. I do go the self-publishing route. My games look pretty messy initially, and then
yeah,
there's sort of like a halfway point where I make the transition. But it's always tough to know when I want to dive into. All right, I got to make this look nice now. This has to look like it's a game. It can't just look like I cut out a bunch of letters from a magazine and then pasted them onto a board and said, "Here you go." It's tough
yeah,
to know for me when I want to make that transition because I tend to go in steps, and which is why I kind of am always fascinated by the sort of higher level graphics approach to game design. Because to be honest, like in a lot of design groups I've seen online and elsewhere, you'll have a lot of naysayers who will say, "Hey, don't invest that much visually into your game because you might change a bunch." And
right,
I heard this for a while, and I feel like lately I've seen a lot of designers come out of the woodworks and say, "Hey, actually, I like having stronger visuals early on for a variety of reasons." Readability, something that you've mentioned, seems very prominent in that. But I've also seen people in the self-publishing circuit mention like when you're playtesting a game, you're also simultaneously pitching a game.
yeah,
And I could
it's
see
true.
that being relevant even for people pitching to publishers to an extent. Like it should at least probably look nice. My experience in the industry is in general is that the sort of level of skill at entry is just increasing over time. It's been awesome seeing a lot of new designers come in with these really cool ideas and these unique skill sets, and you can just see it in their games. Um,
Yeah.
so I was just gonna sort of dive into your type of playtesting and sort of how you run playtesting. When you're playtesting your games,
Mhm.
what are you generally looking for, and what is sort of most important for you to observe in a playtest?
Yeah, so I think kind of connecting with the graphic design aspect, right? So graphic design is my strong point, but balancing and thinking about things strategically are definitely not my strong point. Um, so those are the things that I definitely am, hoping to lean on for feedback on my playtests. It just it doesn't come natural to me. So getting that kind of feedback is always great. Balancing um, mechanics or characters or actions and things like that.
Hmm. When you're going through a game and the game is evolving, is the type of feedback that you're looking for that specific game also changing? Or do you tend to focus on the same elements throughout the evolution of your game?
A little bit of both, I'd say. I mean, I'm always open for general first impressions, for sure. However, as I go along with playtests, and I'm hoping to get closer and closer to a finished, polished, game, for sure. Yeah, the
Hmm.
the questions do change. If I'm trying a specific, maybe I'm trying to add a fifth player, that is something that's going to be a lot of the feedback I'm looking for is going to be related to that, or I'm trying to add a new action or a new mechanic or something just to
Hmm.
see how it works. Yeah, all of those I think anything you're trying to add on to just test to see, tweak little things uh,
Hmm.
to the core design that you've built off of, um, are just always things that I'm uh, looking for specific feedback on.
So regarding feedback and iteration, um, because it's looking for specific things, trying to. I like going into a playtest with a goal personally. To an extent, are there certain things like when you go into a playtest, do you have like like a short-term goal, like you want to figure out this information, like do you sort of have that conscious thought, or do you normally just sort of have like a general list of things that you're looking for?
I kind of just have a general list.
Hmm.
Um, I like the idea of going in with the goal, but I find a lot of the times that I don't, unless I've tweaked things a lot. That is usually going to be my general goal, is to get feedback on that specific thing.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of the times I don't like to mention that right up front. I want to see if people can notice that there is a change, or something stands out to them. If something stands out to them as different, or not fitting with the rest of the game, I definitely want to find that out after the fact versus pointing it out to them.
Do you not communicate that because you feel it will influence the playtester experience? Or do you not communicate that because you want to see if they catch it, basically?
Yeah, I just primarily I just don't want to influence uh their thought process on things. I don't want them to change their decision making
Right.
uh based on that. And I wouldn't say that I do that for every playtest.
Hmm.
But usually if it's a brand new change, I might mention it
Right.
a time or two for a playtest or two, just hey, I just so you're aware, just warning you, I added this one thing, and I might break the game, but just letting you know. Um, but after a few playtests, as it goes along and I know it's working, I probably just stay quiet about it and
Hmm.
see if anyone sees anything that's a problem.
That all makes sense to me. I feel like I'm most conscious of that sort of process when I'm in unguided playtests where I am giving them a rule book and I'm like, are they going to catch this? That's when I'm like
Mm.
painfully aware of it because everything's written down and I'm not saying anything. I think I think I envy you to an extent because I will always give up that secret thing I'm looking for in a playtest if I'm talking because I'm too loud. So if I'm present and no one's caught it yet, at some point I'm like, "Hey, did you all notice that this turnip here is slightly larger than the other turnips? What's going on there?" And I give it away every time. Um, uh, so Joseph, I kind of wanted to dive back into graphic design because I think this is sort of an interesting part of the discussion. Uh, we're sort
Yeah.
of on the topic of iteration in game design. You know, you listen to feedback and you look for certain things, and then you change things up. How can you use graphic design to like make those transition steps in your design? Like, how do you utilize that? Because if I'm understanding correctly, you're sort of a graphic design oriented person, and when you're going to these playtests, you're looking for like very strong mechanical changes and things like that, and like stuff that doesn't balance right, all that kind of stuff. How do you use graphic design to navigate that and make those changes later on? Like, what are some of the things that you look for, and how do you connect those elements of visual thinking versus mechanical thinking?
Who? Well, I'm always trying to kind of match the two, and that's again probably uh, more on leaning on the curse side of the of my mindset on things. But yeah, I'm always trying to think, how can I make this visual,
Mm-hmm.
this mechanic, this thing that I want to iterate on. How can I make this easier to understand? How can I make it thematic? How can I include it in the game so it makes sense,
Right.
um, thematically or visually?
Right. When you're playtesting a game, do you tend to focus more on the mechanical side of things as a playtester, or the graphic design of things as a level of things as a playtester?
I definitely think I focus on graphic design a
Well,
bit more than a lot of the other playtesters. I think,
that's
although I
totally fair.
well, I try not to be. Again, like I said, I totally expect designers to just not bother with it, with graphic design,
Hmm.
when they're just putting a prototype out. Um, so usually in that case, I'm not. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna go crazy on them, or anything like that. But I definitely do want to give them feedback that might be useful and helpful on helping them construct their uh, any kind of visual guides that they have, or um, oh hey, you put gray font on a white background. Maybe you want to you might want to
Right.
make that pop a little bit better.
Right.
um, just things to just make things easier to, goes back to readability. um,
Are there common threads of things that you notice in a lot of your playtests that are graphic design oriented?
Readability.
Readability.
Yeah. um, that's always the big one I
And
I go off of. Yeah.
is that text based usually? Like when we're talking about
Um.
readability, is that like
Yeah.
specifically text, or are we talking about
No.
like images and other things of that nature?
It's text. It's icons. Um, images. Yeah. I see a lot of designers. They want to present these awesome illustrations and pieces of art, and then they throw text on top of that, which is, normally you think it would work, but it typically does not. It's just too busy, and you don't know what to focus on. So I try to, if I see that, I'm definitely pointing it out, regardless of the how far in the process they are. Um, that's the other thing too. I usually, either early on or near the end of our playtest, I like to ask them how far along in development they are, and that kind of gauges how critical I'm going to be on my feedback, or uh, what I'll focus on.
No, that makes perfect sense. I love the word readability, especially in game design, because I don't hear it very often in a lot of discussions. It almost seems assumed, but I think because it's assumed, uh, it's not a conscious thought a lot of people have in their day-to-day discussions of a game. Because if you can't read the game, if you can't interpret the game, you're just not going to be able to play the game. It's almost impossible to do that. And so I
Yeah.
guess I was going to just sort of in the tune of all of this, when I'm thinking of readability and I'm putting a game together, what are some relatively large no nos that I should avoid? Like one thing you mentioned was text over images.
Yes.
What anything
Yeah.
else that comes to mind that I should be at least wary of?
Yeah. So if you have a dark background, um, for a card, or for anything really, if you're working with a dark background, highly recommend white text. um, and then it's the reverse. If you're using, if you have a white background, you use black text. It seems simple, but sometimes I do see people use the opposites.
Readability seems like the keyword of the day, keyword of the episode. I think I should just name the episode readability. Uh,
Yeah.
one of the sort of the questions I had for you also, which I haven't gotten into yet. As you have progressed as a designer, I love asking designers this question because it's always interesting. How have your methods for playtesting evolved as you've delved deeper into game design, and has that also influenced how you conduct graphic design?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I mentioned a little bit before that I I'm was kind of trying to slowly move away from focusing so much graphic design, and um, how pretty my prototypes looked on day one. So trying to find that balance that I can be happy of and still have something playable at the end of the day has been uh, a challenge, but it's something that has helped, I think, in my current process. Um, just not focusing so much on trying to make things look pretty. At the end of the day, a 20% solution is fine, and it gets the point across. And as long as it's readable, um, it should be fine. Um, it, I think it's kind of related to your question, but for me, graphic design is just uh, I'm just a visual person, so I find my motivation to build a prototype and design off of that. Um, it has to be. I have to work on it visually. That's just the way I work. That's just the way I stay motivated on a
What does
project.
it mean to work on a game visually? I'm kind of curious about how you define that.
Yeah. Board game design is so. I mean, there's so many different elements that could be considered visual. Um, when it comes to board games, what's the table presence? Is this going to look good on a table? I always have that close in my mind when I'm designing something. I want to make sure that the end product is going to be visually stunning and visually interesting and intriguing. That's a big element. But in terms of just like graphic design on cards and stuff, that's all part of developing a game visually. I think it's key to telling the story of what the game is and how to play the game. And I mean it's tied to everything, to teaching the game, to playing the game, being immersed in the world that your
I
game is trying to
I
tell.
love the line you used just now, and I think I'm going to keep that with me. That sort of think designing a game visually is telling the story of the game, because that's really just that spoke to me. It's 100% true. Your visual elements
Yeah.
are what draw you into the game and keep you within the game's world. And it's interesting thinking about a game from that angle, because games are more than just a bunch of mechanics. They're the visual presence, the
Yeah.
immersion, the player's experience, the fun that you have in the game. Otherwise, we would just have a bunch of numbers on paper, and that would be game. But it's not just that; it's all these other elements as well. And so I really like that
Right.
it's the story of the game. And so I really appreciate that quote, and I'm gonna write that down somewhere later so I can keep that with me when I'm thinking about game design. Um, well, Joseph,
Yeah.
thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts on game design and playtesting day, and I'm really glad I got to sort of dive into your brain a little bit regarding the graphic design elements of that. Is there anything that you wanted to share with us about regarding what you're working on, how to follow you, where to find you on this big old internet?
Yeah. So currently, I'm working on a game called Toppings. It's a game for picky pizza eaters. um, I can be found on Twitter. My sorry, my what do you call it?
Twitter
Twitter
handle, Twitter account.
tag. Okay. Yeah, my Twitter handle is Joe Ludimus. And I also am a self-publisher. So ludimus.com, or I'm sorry, ludimusgames.com is where you could find out more about uh, the games I'm working on and about me. And yeah,
Cool. Well, again, Joseph, thank you so much for being with us today. For those listening in, remember that you can always find more information on Break My Game and some of the cool designers that we work with and the community in general at breakmygame.com. You're able to find us on Twitter at twitter.com/breakmygameg. And of course, we're also on facebook.com/breakmygameg as well. Love having you on today, Joseph. Thank you again, and hope you all have a wonderful time playtesting and designing. Have a good one.